She trembled as the penthouse door closed behind her, the sound echoing like an omen of what was to come. The panoramic view of illuminated New York spread before her eyes, the golden lights reflecting in the Hudson River like fallen stars on dark water. But all she could feel was the heat of his body too close, the scent of tobacco and cedar that invaded her senses, and the crushing weight of her own inexperience. Emily Taylor clutched the small silver cross pendant hanging from her neck, her grandmother Sarah's heirloom. Her fingers trembled slightly as she contemplated the city that had been her home for 3 years, so different from the small Virginia town where she had grown up with Sunday services and 4th of July parades. That's when he approached, his steps resonating on the hardwood floor. Michael Reynolds, with his imposing 6'2" frame, his intense brown eyes fixed on hers, and that air of a man who had conquered the world with his own hands. The owner of the prestigious design firm where she, at 23, had secured an internship just 3 months ago. "I promise to be patient, Emily," he murmured, his deep voice making her stomach flip. In that moment, something inside her broke and rebuilt itself simultaneously. The young woman who had arrived in New York with a trunk full of traditional values and architectural dreams now faced the most important decision of her life: to allow herself to feel or to remain bound by expectations woven for her like an inevitable destiny. The warm June breeze entered through the open window, bringing with it the scent of the city and the distant sound of jazz from somewhere several blocks away. Emily closed her eyes, allowing her senses to transport her while Michael's hand gently rested on hers. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he whispered, offering her a glass of red wine that shimmered like liquid ruby under the dim light. "We can simply talk." But they both knew that words had never been the true language between them. From that first day when she spilled coffee with cream on his white linen shirt and blushed while apologizing, something more powerful than words had begun to weave their fate. The small town of Cedar Creek seemed suspended in time, with its white houses and church spires that stood out against the Virginia sky. It was Sunday, and the sound of bells from St. Michael's Church echoed through the cobblestone streets, calling the faithful to the 11 o'clock service. Margaret Taylor, with her eternal floral dress and impeccable bun, was embroidering a tablecloth for her daughter's hope chest, while the morning sun bathed the porch filled with hydrangeas that perfumed the air. Her hands, weathered by years of work and devotion, moved with mechanical precision, each stitch a silent prayer. "Mum, I've told you 1,000 times I don't need a hope chest," said Emily, sitting beside her with a cup of chamomile tea. "I'm studying architecture, not preparing to be a traditional wife." Margaret raised her gaze, her dark eyes carrying generations of wisdom and feminine resignation. "My dear, you can build buildings so tall they touch the sky, but at the end of the day, a woman needs her own home, a man who respects her, and a good name to pass on to her children." Emily sighed, recognizing in those words the echo of centuries of tradition that weighed on her shoulders like an invisible cloak. She had chosen to study in New York precisely to escape this predetermined destiny, but every time she returned home, she felt how the roots of the past pulled her back to the ground. "What if I want something more, Mum? What if I want to experience life before locking it into an embroidery pattern?" Margaret's fingers paused for a moment, as if the question had touched an old, never-healed wound. "Feeling too much is dangerous, Emily. Feelings are like wild rivers. If you don't channel them properly, they can sweep you away. Your father and I married because our families decided, and look at us, 30 years later, we're still together. But are you happy, Mum?" The question hung in the perfumed air of the porch as Margaret resumed her embroidery without answering. In her silence, Emily found the answer she feared and the determination she needed to make her own decisions when she returned to New York. That same afternoon, while helping her father Robert tend to the small family vineyard, Emily tried to imagine how he would react if he knew about Michael. Her father, a man with hands calloused from working the land and principles as firm as the twisted trunks of the century-old grapevines, would never understand that his daughter felt something for a man 15 years her senior, divorced, with a reputation that preceded his Chicago name. "You seem distracted, sweetheart," Robert commented, wiping sweat from his forehead with a worn handkerchief. "Is it about your exams?" Emily smiled, grateful for the opportunity for a white lie. "Yes, Dad. The end of my degree is proving harder than I thought. Remember what I always tell you. Things worth having require sacrifice. Your studies are your future. Don't waste them on passing distractions. Passing distractions. Those words etched themselves in Emily's mind as the sun set behind the hills, painting the landscape in copper and golden hues. Was that what Michael represented in her life? A distraction pulling her away from her true path. That night in her childhood bedroom, with walls still decorated with posters of famous architects and rosaries hanging by the window, Emily received a message on her phone. It was him. "I miss you, Virginia girl. The office is empty without your smile. When are you coming back to New York?" She read the message over and over, each word resonating in her heart like a promise or a threat. She couldn't clearly distinguish which. Reynolds' design occupied a restored brownstone on West 21st Street, in the heart of Chelsea. The high ceilings with original moldings contrasted with ultra-modern furniture and large glass panels dividing the workspaces. Emily entered that March morning with her heart pounding in her throat. It was her first day as an intern, after winning the university competition that had opened the doors to one of the most prestigious firms in America. She wore a simple black pantsuit bought especially for the occasion, and had her long chestnut hair tied in a low ponytail. "So you're Emily Taylor, the competition winner?" The deep voice startled her. She turned to find Michael Reynolds in person, not as she had seen him in design magazines, but real, imposing, with that aura of natural authority emanating from every pore of his skin. He wore an impeccable charcoal grey suit, white shirt without a tie, and Italian shoes that probably cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe. "Yes, sir. It's an honor to be here," she responded, extending her hand formally. He looked at her with curiosity, as if he could see through her professional facade to the small-town girl, who still marveled at skyscrapers and crossed herself when passing churches. "Welcome, Emily. Your project on sustainable spaces inspired by traditional Virginia architecture impressed me. You have a gift for blending the old with the new," he said, shaking her hand perhaps a second longer than necessary. "Jessica will show you to your workspace." Thus it all began, with a handshake, a look that lasted too long, and the seed of an attraction that would grow silently during the weeks that followed. By Friday of that first week, Emily had integrated into the studio's routine, working mainly with the junior team on minor projects. But that morning, as she prepared coffee in the small kitchen, tragedy struck. Michael entered just as she turned with a cup brimming with coffee and cream. The hot liquid splashed directly onto his immaculate white linen shirt. Emily froze, horror reflected in her eyes as she watched the stain spread. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds," she exclaimed, mortified, desperately searching for napkins to try to fix the disaster. To her surprise, instead of getting angry, Michael let out a laugh. A genuine laugh that completely transformed his usually serious face. "Don't worry, little one," he said, using for the first time that nickname that would later become something intimate between them. "It's just a shirt." Their fingers brushed as they both tried to clean the stain, and something invisible but powerful passed between them like an electric current. Emily blushed intensely, her cheeks taking on the shade of the peonies that grew in her family's garden. "I promise to be more careful next time," she whispered, unable to hold his gaze. "I hope not," he responded quietly, almost to himself. People who are too careful rarely create anything extraordinary. From that day forward, Michael began to seek her company with small pretexts. Project reviews he could have delegated to others, consultations about details any other professional could have answered, coffees he now asked her to bring specifically to his office. During those moments stolen from time, he discovered that Emily was not just a talented small-town girl. She was an old soul in a young body, with an overflowing passion for vernacular architecture, for spaces that tell stories, for designing places that make people feel connected to their roots. "See these tiles?" he explained one day, showing her samples for a project in Charleston. "They're exact replicas of those that decorated colonial homes in the 18th century. Beauty is in the details, Emily. In the small decisions we make every day." As he spoke, his fingers brushed hers when passing the samples, creating a fascinating contrast. His large, calloused hands, forged from nothing in Chicago's working-class neighborhoods, next to her delicate hands, educated to embroider and pray. "It's as if each piece tells a different story," she responded. mesmerized not only by the beauty of the tile but by his proximity, by his sandalwood and freshly brewed coffee scent, by the intensity of eyes that seemed to know secrets she was only beginning to intuit. "Exactly," he smiled, pleased with her understanding. "And you, Emily Taylor, what story do you want to tell with your life?" The question floated between them like an invitation, a challenge, or perhaps a warning. The small apartment in Greenwich Village that Emily shared with two university classmates had become both her refuge and her prison. Each night after returning from the studio, she would sit by the window overlooking Washington Square Park, watching how the silver moon reflected in the fountain's waters, while thoughts of Michael invaded her mind like an unstoppable tide. "Daydreaming again, huh?" said Lauren, her roommate, a lively New Yorker studying fine arts. "Let me guess, it's about the boss. I can tell by your face every time you come back from work." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, betraying her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, looking away from the park. "I'm just tired from the final project." Lauren sat across from her with a glass of red wine in hand, and that look of someone who has lived more experiences than correspond to her 24 years. "Look, honey, I'm not judging you. Mr. Reynolds is eye candy, with that lone wolf air and those suits that fit him like a glove. But be careful, okay? Men like him don't look for anything serious with 23-year-old interns." Her friend's words pierced like small needles in her heart, materializing the fears that Emily refused to admit even to herself. What could a man like Michael want from her, beyond a passing adventure? "There's nothing between us," she insisted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Not yet," Lauren pointed out, winking at her before leaving her alone with her thoughts. That night, as the distant sounds of the city filtered through the open window, Emily took out the small image of the Virgin Mary she had brought from home. She knelt beside her bed, as she had done since childhood, but the prayers that used to flow easily got stuck in her throat. How could she ask the Virgin to free her from a desire that grew each day, when deep down she didn't want to be liberated from it? The days at the studio became a sweet torment. Each morning, Emily chose her clothes with more care, applied a touch of perfume behind her ears, styled her hair in different ways, unconsciously seeking approval in Michael's eyes. And he noticed. He noticed every small change, every effort, every furtive glance she gave him when she thought no one was watching. The tension between them grew silently, fed by accidental touches while reviewing plans, by professional conversations that drifted into more personal territories, by coffees shared on the building's rooftop, while contemplating the Empire State Building outlined against New York's intense blue sky. It was during one of those coffees that Michael began to reveal parts of himself that he kept hidden from the rest of the world. "My mother still lives in the same 500-square-foot apartment in Chicago," he confessed, as the warm breeze slightly ruffled his perfectly combed hair. "I could buy her a mansion if I wanted, but she refuses to leave the neighborhood where she raised me alone, cleaning other people's houses so I could study." Emily listened, fascinated, discovering in each revelation a new layer of the man who hid behind the facade of the ruthless businessman. "She must be very proud of you," she commented, moved by the image of a single mother fighting against all odds for her son. Michael's eyes darkened slightly. "She is. But I think sometimes she's also scared of how far I've come, as if she fears that one day I'll become one of those rich people whose houses she used to clean." "That will never happen," Emily asserted, with a conviction that surprised even herself. "You have too much soul in your designs. Only someone who knows the value of a home can create spaces that make people feel truly welcome." He looked at her then, as if seeing her for the first time, not as the shy intern or the attractive girl, but as someone capable of seeing through his carefully constructed layers. "You're dangerous, Emily Taylor," he murmured, moving imperceptibly closer. "You see things I've spent years trying to hide." Her heart raced when she felt his hand cover hers on the wrought iron table. A simple gesture that contained complex promises. "I'm organizing a dinner this Friday. An important client from Dubai," he said, seemingly changing the subject, though his fingers continued to gently caress the back of her hand. "I'd like you to come." "Me? But I'm just an intern. I don't have experience with international clients." "I'm not inviting you as an intern, Emily." His brown eyes pierced her with intensity. "I'm inviting you as a woman." The professional line had just been officially crossed, and they both knew it. The restaurant was hidden in a West Village alleyway, one of those exclusive places without a sign at the door that only privileged locals knew about. Emily arrived 5 minutes late, after changing outfits 3 times and desperately asking Lauren for advice on what to wear for a dinner that could change everything. She had finally decided on a simple black dress that fell to her knees, with a neckline that suggested without showing too much, and heels that made her feel elegant but uncomfortable. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, and for the first time since arriving in New York, she wore her lips painted red. When the waiter guided her to the table in the inner courtyard, where scented candles created dancing shadows on whitewashed walls and a small fountain sang softly, Emily was surprised to find Michael alone, with no sign of the supposed Dubai client. "You look beautiful," he said, standing to pull out her chair, his eyes appreciatively taking in every inch of her figure. "The red on your lips suits you perfectly. It highlights your passionate character that you try so hard to hide." Emily felt a mixture of embarrassment and excitement at the direct compliment. "Thank you," she responded, taking her seat. "Will the client be late?" Michael smiled, a wolfish smile that sent both warning and promise signals in equal measure. "There is no client, Emily. That was my excuse to invite you without scaring you off." The revelation should have angered her, but instead a strange sense of relief washed over her. At least now the cards were on the table. "You could have told me the truth," she commented, unfolding the linen napkin onto her lap. "Would you have said yes?" he asked while pouring Napa Valley red wine into crystal glasses that captured the candlelight. Emily remained silent, knowing that the honest answer would probably have been no, not because she didn't want to, but because admitting that desire out loud would have been too frightening. The dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. Appetizers of heirloom tomatoes with artisanal olive oil that shimmered like liquid gold, perfectly seared scallops with microgreens, and conversations that skillfully slid between professional and personal, building bridges between their seemingly distant worlds. He told her about his beginnings, about how he sold sketches of Chicago's skyline to tourists in Millennium Park at 12, about the scholarship he earned to study design at Columbia when no one in his family had ever set foot in a university. She talked about her childhood in Virginia, about summers harvesting grapes with her father, about how she fell in love with architecture when visiting Monticello for the first time, and feeling how the colonial stones told centuries-old stories. As the night progressed and wine loosened their tongues, the tension between them became almost palpable. When Michael's fingers caressed hers across the antique wooden table, a shiver ran down Emily's spine. "I need to be honest with you," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "I'm not looking for a passing romance, Emily. At 38, I've had enough of those to know they lead nowhere." "Then what are you looking for?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Michael looked at her intently, as if carefully considering his response. "Someone who reminds me that innocence without artifice exists. Someone who sees the man, not the businessman or the bank account. Someone like you." The words floated between them, laden with meaning and potential. Emily felt as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, knowing that the next step could change the course of her life forever. "I'm afraid," she finally confessed, lowering her gaze to their intertwined hands. "Afraid of not being enough, of being just a passing novelty for you, of losing myself in the process." He gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "Fear is natural when something truly matters. And you, Emily Taylor, matter more than you should for a man like me." When they left the restaurant, stars speckled the night sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked in silence through narrow streets, their shoulders occasionally brushing, until they reached a small park with a view of the illuminated Brooklyn Bridge in the distance. "It's so beautiful it hurts," whispered Emily, contemplating the scene. "Yes, it is," responded Michael, but he wasn't looking at the bridge. He was looking at her. And there, under New York's starlit sky, he leaned in slowly, giving her time to back away if she wished. She didn't. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss that contained both promise and caution, a kiss that tasted of expensive wine and irreversible decisions. When they separated, both knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The following weeks were a whirlwind of mutual discoveries. They met outside the studio, away from curious glances and malicious rumors. Michael showed Emily a New York that she, despite living there for 3 years, had never really known. He took her to the Metropolitan Museum of Art during less crowded hours, explaining each architectural detail with contagious passion, pointing out nuances that only a trained eye like his could appreciate. He guided her to jazz clubs in hidden basements, where the music moved her to tears without knowing why, as if those melodies connected with an ancestral part of her soul. He invited her to antique bookstores near Columbia, where the scent of yellowed pages mingled with his cologne, and the smell of approaching autumn that perfumed the streets. There she discovered that Michael read Walt Whitman, that he collected vinyl records of Miles Davis and Ella Fitzgerald, that he had gone hungry in his childhood in Chicago and still kept the first dollar he ever earned framed in his office. Each revelation made him more human, closer, more dangerous to the convictions with which Emily had been raised. One afternoon, as they strolled through Central Park, under the fresh shade of centuries-old trees, Emily dared to ask what had been gnawing at her mind for weeks. "Why me, Michael? You've been with much more sophisticated women, more experienced, more fitting for your world." He stopped, taking her hands in his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen. "Precisely because of that, Emily. Because you're not like them. Because when you look at me, you don't see the successful Michael Reynolds who appears in design magazines, but the boy from Chicago who still marvels at the beauty of the world." He paused, as if searching for the exact words to explain something complex. "The women I've known, they all wanted something from me. My money, my influence, my body, never my soul. You're the first who doesn't try to impress or manipulate me. The first who blushes when I look at you too long, who passionately discusses my architectural ideas, who says grace before meals thinking I don't notice." Emily smiled, embarrassed at being caught in this small intimacy. "My grandmother Sarah always says that God is in the small details, even in a bite of bread," she explained, surprised at how easy it was to talk about faith with him when it had always been something she hid in her progressive university circles. "Your grandmother is a wise woman," he smiled. "I'd like to meet her someday." The implicit suggestion of a shared future beyond the immediate present made Emily's heart skip a beat. It was the first time Michael had hinted at something long-term. That same night, in her Greenwich Village apartment, while listening to Lauren talk about her latest conquest, Emily realized how much she had changed in such a short time. The stories of one-night adventures that used to scandalize her now seemed empty, lacking the deep emotional connection she was building with Michael. "You're in love," Lauren declared suddenly, interrupting her own narrative. "You have that look of someone who's found something they didn't know they were looking for." Emily didn't deny it. She couldn't. The feeling had grown silently within her, like those plants that flower even in darkness, desperately seeking light. The next day, while working on a project for a boutique hotel in Martha's Vineyard, Michael entered her small workspace with a determined expression she had already learned to recognize. "I have a proposal for you," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk with that natural confidence that emanated from him. "A weekend at my house in the Berkshires, away from the city, away from judging eyes, just you and me." Emily immediately understood what that invitation implied. A weekend together, away from everything, was a step toward territory she had never explored. Michael seemed to read her thoughts. "No pressure, little one," he added, using that nickname that always melted her defenses. "We can simply enjoy the landscape, cook together, talk without the constant interruptions of calls and meetings. What happens or doesn't happen will depend entirely on you." The decision hung before her like a ripe fruit ready to be picked or left to fall. "I need to think about it," she finally responded, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded, respecting her indecision without pressuring. "Take all the time you need. The Berkshire landscape is especially beautiful this time of year, with the maple trees beginning to change color and the scent of wild herbs filling the air. If you decide to come, we'll leave Friday after work." That night, Emily spent hours in front of the image of the Virgin Mary, the silver cross pressed between her trembling fingers, divided between two worlds. The tradition that had formed her in Sunday services and 4th of July parades, and the freedom that pulsed through the veins of modern New York, where she studied architecture. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind with old sayings about honor and reputation. But there was another voice, newer, stronger, that whispered about choices and freedom and the right to write her own story. After a night of insomnia and reflection, Emily made her decision. With trembling fingers, she sent a message that would change the course of her life. "I'll go with you to the Berkshires. I can't promise anything more than my company, but it's yours if you want it." The response came almost immediately. "It's more than enough. Your company is all I desire." The road wound through rugged mountains, each curve revealing more impressive landscapes than the last. Emily watched, fascinated, as the world changed as they climbed into the Berkshires. The neat suburbs gave way to tall maple trees beginning to show hints of gold and red. The plains transformed into steep valleys that seemed to climb toward the sky. Michael drove his Audi with the confidence of someone who knows every bend in the road, one hand on the wheel and the other occasionally resting on hers. Leonard Cohen played on the stereo, his deep voice seeming the perfect soundtrack for these dramatic landscapes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "About how this landscape seems suspended between two worlds, like me," she answered honestly. "Neither completely wild nor completely tamed." He smiled, appreciating the depth of her observation. "That's exactly what made me fall in love with these mountains. They're like you, Emily. A perfect fusion of untamed nature and civilized grace." After almost 3 hours of driving, they took a dirt road that wound between maple and oak trees. At the end of the path appeared the house, a construction of stone and dark wooden beams, perfectly integrated into the landscape, as if it had grown naturally from the mountain. "It's beautiful," whispered Emily, captivated by the simple elegance of the dwelling. "It was the first property I bought when I started to do well," explained Michael, parking in front of a small porch covered with climbing wisteria. "I restored it with my own hands over 3 years. Every stone, every beam, every detail was a conscious decision." Upon entering, Emily was impressed by the harmony of the interior space. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, stone walls, floors of reclaimed hardwood that retained the warmth of the sun. Large windows framed spectacular views of the mountains, blurring the boundary between inside and outside. "This place tells your story better than any words," she said, her eyes taking in the architectural details that blended traditional New England influences with contemporary touches. "It's my true home," he confessed. "The only place where I can be simply Michael, without surnames or expectations." During the first day, as he had promised, he maintained a respectful distance. He cooked for her dishes that perfumed the entire house: New England clam chowder, perfectly grilled steak with vegetables from local farms, apple crumble with maple syrup that was sweet and rich at the same time. They hiked trails surrounded by wild thyme and autumn wildflowers, picked blackberries from bushes that grew between the rocks, watched hawks soaring high above using the thermal currents. In the mid-afternoon, when the sun began to descend, they sat in a clearing with a view of the valley, sharing a bottle of local wine and pieces of artisanal cheese that Michael had bought in a nearby town. "How did you learn to cook like this?" asked Emily, surprised by his culinary skills. "My mother worked long hours. From the age of 10, I was the one who prepared dinner for when she came home exhausted," he explained, his gaze losing itself in the horizon. "At first they were simple dishes, fried eggs, rice, potatoes, but over time I began to experiment. I wanted her to have something special after days of cleaning other people's houses." Emily felt a new wave of tenderness toward him. Beneath the facade of the successful businessman hid a boy who had grown up too quickly, who had learned to care for others before himself. At nightfall, they lit the fireplace in the main room. The fire projected dancing shadows on the walls, while the mountain wind whistled softly among the trees outside. Seated on hand-woven rugs, with glasses of red wine and the warmth of flames caressing their faces, Michael began to tell his complete story. He had been born in a working-class neighborhood of Chicago, where violence still echoed in whispered conversations, where his mother, Elizabeth, worked 18 hours a day cleaning other people's houses to keep them afloat after being abandoned by his father before birth. By age 12, he was already selling sketches of urban landscapes to tourists, discovering that he had talent for imagining beautiful spaces, even while living in one that wasn't. "At 18, I got a scholarship to study design at Columbia," he continued, his eyes reflecting the flames. "My mother cried when I told her, not from joy, but from fear. She was afraid I would move so far from my roots that one day I would be ashamed of her, of our humble past." But that never happened, affirmed Emily, not as a question but as a certainty. No, he smiled sadly. But there was a moment when it almost did. He then told her about his years of meteoric rise. His first studio in Chicago at 25, his first major projects in Miami and Los Angeles at 30, his expansion to international markets. With each rung he climbed, the people around him changed. Richer friends, more exclusive circles, more sophisticated women. I was about to get married, you know, he revealed, pouring himself more wine. Catherine, heiress to a hotel chain. Everything was prepared, the wedding of the year in the Hamptons. A week before the ceremony, I overheard her talking to her mother on the phone. She was saying that I was a miracle of social mobility, that she had polished the boy from the projects until making him presentable. His voice broke slightly at the memory. I confronted her that same night. She didn't deny anything. In fact, she seemed genuinely confused by my anger. For her, my humble origins were a defect she had managed to correct, not a fundamental part of who I am. Emily felt a protective rage expand in her chest. "What an idiotic woman," she said, with a vehemence that surprised her. She didn't understand that it's precisely that origin that gives you the empathy to design spaces that make people feel truly welcomed. He looked at her then, with an intensity that left her breathless. "That's exactly what no one had ever seen, Emily. That my calloused hands and my Chicago accent and my memories of poverty aren't obstacles I overcame, but tools I use every day in my work." He moved closer to her slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. "Since that disaster, I built walls around myself. I became cynical, distrustful. Relationships were transactional, brief, superficial, until you spilled coffee on my shirt and blushed as if you'd committed a capital sin." His hand gently caressed her cheek, a touch as delicate as the brush of a feather. "That morning, for the first time in years, I saw innocence without artifice, vulnerability without manipulation, and something inside me, something I thought was dead and buried, came back to life." Emily could feel her heart beating so hard she feared he might hear it. Michael was so close now she could distinguish small golden flecks in his brown eyes, smell the aroma of wine and sandalwood on his breath. "I'm afraid," she confessed in a whisper, "not of the physical act, but of losing myself in you, of forgetting who I am, where I come from, what I want." "I would never ask you to change, Emily," he responded, his deep voice laden with emotion. "What fascinates me about you is precisely your authenticity, your ability to remain true to your roots, even in a world that pressures you to forget them." Their foreheads touched, sharing the same air, suspended in a moment of decision. "If you decide to go to your room right now, I'll respect that," he murmured. "If you decide to stay, I promise that I will never ever pressure you to do anything you're not ready for." Emily closed her eyes, letting the sensations flood her. The warmth of the fire on her skin, the scent of burning wood mingled with his cologne, the sound of wind through the trees like an ancestral whisper, reminding her that life is too brief to live according to rules written by others. When she opened her eyes again, she had made her decision. With trembling but determined hands, she stood and extended her hand to him. "Show me your room, Michael." The return to New York brought with it the brutal reintegration into reality. The dreamlike world of the Berkshires, where only they existed, nature and time that seemed to stretch infinitely, was left behind like a dream from which both had abruptly awakened. On Monday morning, upon entering the studio, Emily immediately perceived that something had changed. Conversations ceased abruptly when she passed. Glances followed her with a mixture of curiosity and barely disguised malice, and Jessica Parker, the creative director who had been working with Michael for 5 years, observed her with poorly concealed resentment. It was Martha, the middle-aged receptionist with whom Emily had established a cordial relationship, who finally warned her during the coffee break. "Be careful, dear," she whispered, making sure no one heard them in the small kitchen. "Jessica has put a target on your back. It seems someone saw you and the boss dining in the West Village 2 weeks ago, and rumors are flying." Emily felt the floor move beneath her feet. They had been so careful, or at least they thought they had been. She calmed her expression, trying to appear with a tranquility she was far from feeling. "Thank you for warning me, Martha, but there's nothing to worry about. It was a professional dinner to discuss a project." The woman looked at her with that wise compassion of someone who has seen too much of the world. Darling, you can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. I know that look, I've seen it before. Just remember that for him, this might be just another chapter. For you, by the way, your eyes light up when he enters a room. It could be the entire story. Martha's words stayed with her throughout the day, growing like a shadow as the sun descended. By the time she finished her workday, the seed of doubt had taken deep roots in her mind. That afternoon, as she crossed Washington Square Park, under the scorching August sun, Emily received a message from Michael inviting her to dinner at his penthouse. Her first impulse was to accept immediately, but something held her back. She needed space to think, to evaluate what was happening in her life, to make sure she wasn't making a mistake she would regret. She responded with an excuse about pending work for the university, the first time she had declined an invitation from him since they began seeing each other. His response was understanding, without pressure, which somehow made her feel even worse. The following days were an exercise in avoidance. Emily arrived at the studio early, concentrated exclusively on her tasks, ate her lunch in nearby parks instead of the common room, and left punctually at closing time. She ignored Michael's calls, responded to his messages with short and professional phrases, meticulously constructing a wall between them. Meanwhile, rumors grew and transformed, fed by Jessica's venom. Emily heard fragments of conversations in the bathrooms, barely disguised malicious comments, that she was just one more in Michael's long list of conquests, that he was using the naive intern for fun, that in weeks she would be discarded like all the others. One afternoon, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere of the office and the accusing glances, Emily sought refuge in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Seated in the cool shadows, under the imposing Gothic vaults that had witnessed centuries of human drama, she tried to find answers in the shadows and the smell of incense. Was she really just a passing adventure for Michael? Had she let herself be deceived by beautiful words and studied gestures? Was she as naive as everyone seemed to believe? The doubts gnawed at her as she watched the colored light filtering through the stained glass, creating kaleidoscopic patterns on the ancient stone floor. 2 weeks after her return from the Berkshires, Emily took advantage of a weekend to visit her family in Virginia. She needed her mother's embrace, the simple but profound wisdom of her grandmother Sarah, even the rough but honest firmness of her father. It was during this visit, while helping her grandmother shell peas on the porch perfumed by jasmines, when she finally dared to speak, albeit in a veiled manner. "Grandma, how did you know that Grandpa was the right man? Were you never afraid of making a mistake?" Sarah, with her knotted hands and face furrowed by wrinkles that mapped a life of hard work and tenacious love, smiled with that wisdom that only years bestow. "Of course I was afraid, child. Only fools aren't when it comes to matters of the heart," she responded without stopping her work. "But there are fears that protect you and fears that imprison you. You must learn to distinguish them." She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "You know, your great-grandparents opposed my marriage to your grandfather John. He was a railroad worker, without land or a house of his own. They said he would condemn me to a life of hardship, that I could aspire to something better." Emily listened, fascinated. She had never heard this family story. "But I saw something in him that others couldn't see. His integrity, his way of treating animals with respect, how he shared his scarce food with other workers in greater need," continued Sarah. "The night before we eloped, my mother begged me to reconsider my decision. I remember her exact words, 'Daughter, tradition says that decent women wait and obey.'" The old woman let out a playful giggle, surprisingly youthful in her wrinkled face. "And you know what I answered? 'Mother, tradition is not synonymous with fear. Purity does not mean ignorance. I have the right to choose my love, not to run from it." Her eyes, still vivid and piercing despite incipient cataracts, fixed on Emily's. "My granddaughter, I don't know who the man is who has put that look in your eyes, but if he makes you feel both scared and brave, lost and found, it's because your heart has already made a decision that your head is still debating." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. Somehow, without being told anything concrete, her grandmother had seen directly into her soul. "But what if the rumors are true? What if I'm just another one on his list? What if—" Sarah interrupted her with a gesture of her wrinkled hand. "The what-ifs are the heaviest chains a woman can carry, Emily. The only truth that matters is what you see in his eyes when he thinks no one is looking. The rest is gossip from people who fear others' happiness because it makes their own unhappiness more evident. That night, lying in her childhood bed, surrounded by memories and simple certainties, Emily made her decision. She would not run away out of fear or pride. She would confront Michael, ask him directly about the rumors, demand absolute honesty. Her heart was already committed. The least she deserved was the truth. Upon returning to New York on Sunday afternoon, an unexpected storm lashed the city. It was one of those rare torrential downpours that transform streets into improvised rivers and cleanse the air of stifling heat. Emily didn't wait until the next day. With her hair soaked and plastered to her face and her clothes dripping, she presented herself at Michael's penthouse. When he opened the door, surprise drew across his face, immediately followed by concern. He had dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days, and stubble that she had never seen in the professional environment. "Emily!" His voice sounded incredulous, as if he were seeing a mirage. She entered without waiting for an invitation, trembling not from cold, but from a mixture of determination and fear. "I need the truth, Michael, the whole truth, about your past, about the previous women, about what I do or don't mean to you." The rain pattered against the penthouse windows, creating a curtain of water that isolated that space from the rest of the city. Michael observed Emily, soaked and trembling, but with a fierce determination in her eyes that left him momentarily speechless. Without saying anything, he disappeared down the hallway and returned with thick cotton towels and a wool blanket. With delicate but efficient gestures, he wrapped her as if she were a small child, dried her hair with gentle touches, prepared chamomile tea that smelled of childhood and golden fields. Only when he saw her less tremulous, seated on his Italian designer sofa with hands clutching the steaming cup, did he sit across from her, ready to bare his soul. "Ask what you want to know, Emily. I'll answer with the absolute truth, even when it hurts." She breathed deeply, gathering the necessary courage. "The rumors at the office, they say I'm just one more, that you have a history of seducing women and discarding them, that this is a game for you." Michael nodded slowly, as if he had expected to start precisely there. "There was a time when those rumors would have been true," he admitted, his deep voice loaded with raw honesty. "After Catherine, after the cancelled wedding and public humiliation, I became someone I don't recognize with pride. I used women as they tried to use me, for convenience, for momentary pleasure, to fill voids." He paused as if the next words cost him physical effort. "Yes, there were others before you. Brief relationships, superficial, without emotional commitment. Some colleagues, some clients, all women who knew exactly what they were getting into, who wanted the same thing I did. Company without complications." Emily felt an irrational pang of jealousy for these unknown women, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "And Jessica? The rumors suggest there was something between you." An expression of discomfort crossed Michael's face. "Jessica and I had a brief affair 4 years ago when she had just divorced. It was a mistake on my part. I shouldn't have mixed the personal with the professional. It ended as soon as it began, but let's say she has difficulties accepting that there wasn't and won't be anything serious between us." "Is that why she hates me so much?" asked Emily, pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "Jessica doesn't hate you, Emily. She hates what you represent. My capacity to change, to feel something real, something I never experienced with her or any other." Silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of the rain now falling less intensely, as if nature itself held its breath before the confessions that floated in the air. "My turn to ask," he finally said. "Why did you disappear these 2 weeks? Why did you avoid me as if I were a contagious disease?" Emily lowered her gaze to her cup, observing the swirls of steam that rose and dissipated. "I was afraid," she confessed. "Afraid of being exactly what the rumors say, a naive woman manipulated by an experienced man. Afraid of building castles in the air while you were just passing the time. Afraid of discovering one day that what we lived in the Berkshires didn't mean to you even half of what it meant to me." Her voice broke slightly on the last phrase. Michael then moved closer, kneeling before her, taking her hands in his. "Emily, look at me," he asked with an intensity that forced her to raise her eyes. "What we lived in the Berkshires changed something fundamental in me. For the first time in years, perhaps in my entire life, I felt completely present, completely alive, completely myself with another person. His brown eyes, usually controlled and enigmatic, now reflected an almost painful vulnerability. I've spent these 2 weeks in hell, convinced that I had lost you because of malicious rumors, or worse yet, that you had realized that a man of my age, with my past, doesn't deserve someone like you. A solitary, unexpected tear rolled down Michael's cheek. It was the first time Emily had seen him display such fragility, and that simple gesture toppled the last barriers of her distrust. "Tell me about them," she asked softly. "All of them. I need to know what I'm facing, what ghosts inhabit your past." And he did. For hours, while the rain continued falling and then ceased giving way to a starry night, Michael spoke of each woman who had marked his life, of his first teenage love in Chicago, who left him when he got the scholarship to Columbia because she didn't want to tie herself to someone with an uncertain future, of the university relationships, intense but ephemeral, of Lisa, his first serious girlfriend in New York, with whom he lived for 3 years but who finally couldn't bear his impossible schedules while he struggled to establish his studio. He told her about Catherine, the heiress who almost became his wife, and how that failure transformed him into a cynic regarding love. He told her about the dark years that followed, of physical connections without emotional substance, of the loneliness that paradoxically grew with each new professional success. "Until you arrived," he concluded, his voice hoarse after hours of confessions, "with your spilled coffee and your hidden cross and your blushes impossible to fake. And I knew I was in trouble because for the first time in years, I felt afraid of not being enough for someone." Emily, who had listened to each word without interrupting, processing, assimilating, understanding, finally spoke. "How can you doubt being enough? You're Michael Reynolds, the boy from Chicago who conquered the design world with talent and determination. You're the man who cooks New England chowder while reciting Walt Whitman, who knows every architectural detail of the Met, who restored a house in the mountains with his own hands." She moved closer to him, gently caressing his tired face. "You're the man who waited for me, who didn't pressure, who promised me patience and kept that promise. How could you not be enough?" When their lips met, the kiss had a different taste from the previous ones. It tasted of truth, of shared vulnerability, of walls torn down. They were no longer the successful businessman and the naive intern, but simply Michael and Emily, two imperfect souls who had found in each other a mirror and a refuge. That night, in the penthouse's master bedroom with a view of New York washed by the rain and now brilliant beneath the moon, they gave themselves to each other without reservations or half-truths. Each caress was a promise, each whisper a confession, each moment of shared pleasure a silent pact of future honesty. Afterward, as they lay entwined in rumpled sheets with the silver moonlight drawing patterns on their naked bodies, Michael whispered against her hair, "I want you to meet my mother. I want to take you to Chicago, show you where I grew up, introduce you to Elizabeth." The proposal, simple but deeply meaningful, made Emily's heart expand in her chest. "I would love to meet her," she responded with sincerity. "I warn you that she's brutally honest and irrationally protective of me," he smiled. "She'll evaluate your every gesture and word as if you were an architectural project she must approve." Emily laughed softly. "She sounds exactly like my father. Maybe we should introduce them. They would form a formidable interrogation team." The mention of her family brought a new seriousness to the conversation. "Do you think your parents will ever accept me, Emily?" he asked, an unusual vulnerability in his voice. A Chicagoan 15 years older, divorced with a complicated past. "I'm not exactly the son-in-law that a traditional Virginia family would dream of for their daughter." She considered the question seriously, imagining the reaction of Robert and Margaret to a man like Michael. "My father will probably look at you as if you were trying to steal his most precious treasure, which is exactly what I am to him," she responded honestly. "My mother will pray novenas and consult with the minister if it's appropriate. But my grandmother Sarah, she will see directly into your heart, and her opinion is what really matters in the family." She propped herself up on an elbow to look him directly in the eyes. "Besides, I don't need their approval to love you, Michael. I'm an adult woman who has made her decision." The word love floated between them, pronounced for the first time, loaded with meaning and consequences. He looked at her with a mixture of amazement and reverence, as if he had just witnessed a miracle. "I love you, Emily Taylor," he declared, the words emerging like a long-contained truth that finally found its freedom. "I love you with an intensity that scares me, because I never thought it was possible to feel this way at 38, after everything I've lived through." "I love you, Michael Reynolds," she responded, the words simple but powerful. "With your past and your scars, with your calloused hands and your Chicago accent, with all that you are, and what I still don't know about you." They sealed this new declaration with a kiss that tasted of promise, of future, of decisions made not from fear, but from the courage to choose love above all else. Chicago in July was a surprisingly vibrant city, so different from the New York that Emily knew. The gentle hills that surrounded the industrial city created a natural amphitheater, where the morning mist slowly dissipated, revealing a landscape of contrasts. Smokestacks of old factories next to the silver curve of the Bean, medieval alleys leading to modern avenues. The taxi left them in front of a red brick building in the south side, a functional structure without pretensions built in the 70s to house working families. Michael, dressed more casually than usual in jeans and an unpressed blue shirt, seemed strangely nervous as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. "It's the first time I've brought anyone here," he confessed in a low voice. "No one in the circle I currently move in knows this part of my life." Emily squeezed his hand in a sign of understanding. Knowing Michael's origin, the place that formed him, was a privilege she didn't take lightly. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a small but powerful presence of a woman. Elizabeth Reynolds, with her grey hair gathered in a simple bun and eyes identical to her son's, radiated a dignity that no circumstance had been able to break. Her hands, rough from decades of hard work, extended first to her son in a fierce embrace, and then, to Emily's surprise, to her with equal intensity. "So you're the girl who accomplished the impossible," she said with a strong Chicago accent, "making my son believe in love again." The small 500-square-foot apartment was a testimony to a simple but dignified life. Functional furniture carefully maintained, family photographs in simple frames, hand-crocheted curtains that filtered Chicago's grey light. In one corner stood an unexpected element, a small altar with an image of the Sacred Heart and votive candles, revealing a devotion that Michael had never mentioned. During lunch, Elizabeth served chicken and dumplings prepared with a recipe passed down through generations. While they ate, the woman deployed an arsenal of direct questions that would have intimidated anyone, but which Emily answered with sincerity and without pretensions. "And your parents approve of this relationship?" asked Elizabeth, serving her more lemonade. "An older man divorced from another region. It can't be what they dreamed for their daughter." "They don't know yet," admitted Emily. "But my grandmother Sarah says that the heart has reasons that reason doesn't know, and she's the true matriarch of the family." Elizabeth nodded, a smile briefly softening her features. "Grandmothers are usually right. Mine, may she rest in peace, always said that Chicagoans and Virginians have more in common than it seems: pride, stubbornness, devotion to the land." Michael observed the exchange with poorly disguised amazement. He had never seen his mother open up so quickly to anyone, especially someone linked to his life in New York or Chicago. "You're good for him," Elizabeth finally declared, with that direct frankness so characteristic of Chicagoans. "You have your feet on the ground but your eyes on the sky. It's what he needs to not lose himself in his own success." After lunch, Michael insisted on showing Emily the places that had marked his childhood. He took her to the small park where he sold his first drawings, to the public school where an art teacher recognized his talent, to the public library where he spent hours studying because at home there wasn't enough space or silence. In each place, Emily saw more clearly the boy he had been, the determined teenager escaping poverty, the young man who transformed hunger into ambition and pain into creativity. The pieces of the puzzle that was Michael Reynolds fit together with each street traveled, each anecdote shared, each shadow of the past illuminated. The visit culminated in a small park on top of a hill from where they dominated the entire city. The sunset tinged the sky in copper tones, reflecting off the skyscrapers that once seemed so unattainable to a boy from the south side. "I came here when I needed to escape," he explained, sitting on a weathered stone bench, "when the apartment felt too small, or when the neighbors' shouts penetrated the walls as if they were paper. I spent hours drawing this panorama, imagining how I could transform the city, dreaming of beautiful spaces I would someday design. Emily listened in silence, moved by the vulnerability he showed in sharing these intimate fragments of his story. "I think I've always been searching for that feeling of belonging," he continued, his gaze lost in the horizon. "That sensation of being in the right place, with the right person without needing to pretend to be someone I'm not." He took Emily's hands in his expression suddenly intense. "With you, for the first time, I feel I've found my home. Not a physical place, but that interior space where I can be completely myself." The words resonated deeply with Emily, who had also been searching for her place in a world where her traditional roots and her modern aspirations seemed constantly in conflict. "It's curious," she responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "I've always felt divided between two worlds, the small Virginia town where I grew up and cosmopolitan New York where I study, between the simple faith of my childhood and the complex questions of adulthood, between the safety of the known and the call of the unexplored." She paused, contemplating the city that stretched at their feet, so different from the landscapes she knew and nevertheless strangely welcoming. "With you, those divisions begin to heal. I don't have to choose between my roots and my wings. I can honor both parts of myself." They remained in silence for a long time, simply existing together in that space suspended between heaven and earth, between past and future, between what they had been and what they might become. That night, in the hotel overlooking Michigan Avenue, as the fine drizzle so characteristic of Chicago pattered against the windows, Michael took a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Emily held her breath, her heart racing at what seemed inevitable. "It's not what you think," he clarified with a smile, opening the box to reveal not a ring, but an old iron key. "At least, not exactly." "What is it?" she asked, confused but intrigued. "The key to my first apartment in New Orleans, the one I rented when I left Chicago. 500 square feet of freedom that meant everything to me then," he explained, placing the heavy key in Emily's palm. "I've kept it all these years, even when I could afford much more luxurious places. It's a kind of anchor to my origins." Their eyes met, conveying what words could barely express. "I want to take you there tomorrow. There's something important I need to ask you in that exact place, where my true life began." Emily understood then that she stood at a threshold before a decision that would mark not only her future, but the way she would integrate her past with what was to come. The key in her hand weighed with the meaning of promises not yet pronounced, but already present in the air between them. "I'll be ready," she responded simply, closing her fingers around the cold metal that gradually warmed with the heat of her skin, as if Michael's story and hers were beginning to merge into a single shared narrative. New Orleans welcomed them with an embrace of tropical heat and intensely blue sky. So different from Chicago's humid gray and New York's golden sunshine, the city offered a third perspective, a new setting for their developing story. The taxi dropped them off on a narrow street in the French Quarter, in the historic center. Michael guided Emily to a building with a peeling facade, but undeniable historic charm. They climbed narrow stairs of worn marble to the third floor, where a dark wooden door with the number 3B awaited the key she still kept. "I haven't changed anything since I moved out," he warned as he opened the door. "It's like a time capsule of my 25-year-old self." The apartment was indeed tiny, a 500-square-foot studio with cracked ceramic tile floors, walls that were once white and now had a yellowish tone, and small windows overlooking an interior courtyard. But what immediately captured Emily's attention were the walls, completely covered with sketches, plans, and architectural drawings, some yellowed by time, others preserved behind glass. "My first design studio," explained Michael with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "I slept on a mattress on the floor and used an overturned fruit crate as a nightstand, but I had space to draw and dream." Emily slowly toured the room, absorbing every detail, recognizing in those early designs the seeds of the style that would later make Michael famous. The fusion of traditional elements with bold innovation, respect for history combined with vision for the future. In one corner, a small, barely functional kitchen preserved a rusted Italian coffee maker and mismatched cups. In another, a tiny bathroom with black and white tiles forming geometric patterns. And in the center, where there should have been a bed, only remained the rectangular mark on the floor where the mattress once lay. "Why have you kept this place all these years?" asked Emily, genuinely curious. Michael breathed deeply, as if gathering courage for an important confession. To remind me where I come from, to not lose myself in success, in money, in the adulation of critics and clients, he responded, his voice deeper than usual. Every time fame or wealth threatened to change me, I would come back here. I'd spend a night on the hard floor, cook pasta in this tiny kitchen drawn by the light of the single ceiling bulb, and I would remember the young man hungry for success, but also for authenticity that I was. He approached Emily, taking her hands in his. I've never brought anyone here. Not partners, not friends, and certainly no woman. This place was just mine, my anchor in reality, when everything else seemed surreal. Emily felt the weight of what that revelation meant, the privilege of being invited to such an intimate and symbolic space. Why have you brought me here? She asked softly. Michael released her hands, only to kneel on the cracked ceramic tile floor. The gesture, as unexpected as it was powerful, made Emily's heart stop for an instant. Because I want to share everything with you, Emily. Not just the man I am now, but the one I was. The hungry boy from Chicago, the ambitious young man from New Orleans, all versions of myself that have brought me to you. From his pocket he extracted not a diamond ring, but the same old key he had shown her the night before. I don't offer a traditional engagement ring, because what I feel for you has nothing conventional about it, he continued, his voice firm but laden with emotion. I offer this key, symbol of my origins, of my naked truth without adornments. I offer a future built together, where your Virginia roots and my Chicago blood intertwine to create something new, something ours. Emily was holding her breath, tears forming in her eyes as the full meaning of that moment unfolded before her. Emily Taylor, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because tradition dictates it or society expects it, but because two souls that have found their home in each other deserve to celebrate that union. Time seemed to stop in that tiny apartment that contained the beginning of one dream and now witnessed the start of another. Emily looked at Michael, kneeling on the floor where he once slept pursuing his future, now offering her not riches or luxuries, but his most essential truth. The answer arose not from calculations or practical considerations, but from that deep certainty that had been growing inside her since that first spilled coffee. Yes, she responded, her voice firm despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Yes, I want to build a life with you, Michael Reynolds, with all your past, present, and future versions. She knelt before him, matching his posture, eliminating any hierarchy between them. She took the key from his hands and pressed it against her heart. And in exchange I offer my truth, my roots, my dreams, my fears, everything I am and hope to become. The kiss that sealed their commitment tasted of salt from tears and promises that went beyond words, beyond rings and traditional ceremonies. A pact between two souls that had found, against all odds, their complementary half. That night they slept on the hard floor of the apartment, on an air mattress hastily bought at a nearby store. Under the single ceiling bulb with moonlight filtering through the small windows, they made plans that went beyond a wedding. We could get married in the spring, suggested Emily, her head resting on Michael's chest, when the dogwoods in Virginia are in bloom. In that small chapel you showed me in photos near your grandmother's town, he added, stroking her hair. Something intimate, just family and close friends. They talked about their families, about how to break the news to them, about the challenges they would face. Robert, with his instinctive distrust of any man who courted his daughter, Margaret, with her concerns about the age difference and Michael's past, Elizabeth with her fierce protectiveness of her only son. My grandmother Sarah will be our ally, assured Emily. She has a special gift for softening my father when he seems intractable. And my mother is already on your side, Michael smiled. I've never seen her accept someone linked to my life so quickly. But beyond the wedding, they dreamed of shared projects, of merging their talents and visions. Emily, about to graduate as an architect, had fresh ideas about sustainability and rescuing traditional techniques that perfectly complemented Michael's experience in interior design. We could open a joint firm, she proposed, surprising herself with her own boldness. Not as your employee or your wife who works with you, but as equal partners, each contributing their specialty. The idea resonated with Michael, who immediately began to visualize it. Reynolds and Taylor, he murmured, savoring how it sounded. Architecture and interior design that honor the past while building the future. We could specialize in restoring historic buildings for new uses, she continued, growing enthusiastic, preserving the soul of old spaces while adapting them to contemporary needs. As the night progressed, their dreams became more concrete, their plans more detailed. They talked about where they would live, perhaps Boston, a city they both loved for different reasons, how they would balance work and personal life, even the possibility of children in the future. "I've always wanted a family," confessed Michael, surprising her. "Despite my history with relationships, or perhaps because of it, I've always dreamed of creating the stable home I didn't have during my adolescence." Emily looked at him in the dim light, discovering once again new layers in the man she thought she knew. "Me too," she admitted. "Although my parents had traditional ideas about a woman's role, they gave me a deep sense of family, of belonging. It's something I want to recreate someday, in our own way." As dawn began to illuminate the small apartment, they sealed their plans with a new commitment. They would never lose the connection to their origins, no matter how much professional or personal success they achieved. "We'll preserve this place," decided Michael, looking around the studio that had been his first independent home, as a reminder that dreams don't need luxurious spaces to flourish, just determined hearts to pursue them. "And we'll regularly visit Virginia and Chicago," added Emily, "so our future children will know where they come from, so they understand that their roots are deep and diverse." When they finally left the apartment that morning, closing the door with the key that now symbolized their shared commitment, both felt they had crossed a definitive threshold, not just toward a future together, but toward a way of life that honored their pasts while building something entirely new. The Taylor family vineyard rose among century-old oak trees, with its white walls shining like a beacon under Virginia's relentless August sun. The property, modest but well-maintained, had belonged to the family for 5 generations, and every stone, every vine, every inch of land told stories of sacrifices and perseverance. Emily felt her heart hammering against her ribs as Michael's car stopped in front of the main entrance. She had given her parents only minimal information, that she would be coming to spend the weekend and bringing someone important for them to meet. She hadn't mentioned that this someone was her boss, 15 years her senior, or that on her left ring finger she wore an antique silver ring that he had bought in a New Orleans antique shop, a perfect complement to the key she kept close to her heart. "Breathe," murmured Michael, gently squeezing her hand. "Remember that we've faced negotiations with Arab sheiks and Russian oligarchs. Your parents can't be more intimidating." Emily let out a nervous laugh, grateful for his attempt to ease the tension. "You don't know my father when it comes to his only daughter," she responded, watching as the house door opened and 3 figures appeared on the threshold. Robert Taylor, with his eternal straw hat and skin weathered by decades under the Virginia sun, stepped forward with firm steps. He was a man of medium height, but imposing presence with hands calloused from working the land, and penetrating eyes that seemed to see directly into people's souls. Behind him came Margaret, with her eternal floral dress and face that was a map of maternal concerns, and Grandmother Sarah, small but erect at 87, leaning slightly on a cane carved by Robert himself. Michael, dressed with simplicity but elegance in linen pants and a white shirt without a tie, descended from the vehicle first, circling it to open the door for Emily in a gesture of courtesy that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "Dad? Mom? Grandma?" began Emily, her voice firmer than she expected. "This is Michael Reynolds." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly upon recognizing the name. "The owner of the firm where you work?" he asked, his tone neutral but laden with meaning. "Yes, Mr. Taylor," responded Michael, extending his hand confidently. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Emily speaks of you with great admiration." Robert evaluated the extended hand for a moment that seemed eternal before shaking it, his grip firm like a silent test of character. "So you're from Chicago," he commented, his ear immediately catching the accent that Michael had never completely lost. "From Chicago, yes," confirmed Michael, "though I've lived for years between New York, New Orleans, and other cities." The tension was palpable as Margaret greeted him with nervous courtesy and invited them inside, where the temperature was considerably cooler thanks to the thick walls and the central courtyard shaded by an ancient magnolia. It was Grandmother Sarah who broke the ice in an unexpected way. She planted herself in front of Michael, her eyes narrowed by age but bright with intelligence, and declared without preamble, "So you're the man who put that sparkle in my granddaughter's eyes. Let me see you properly." With the authority that only elderly matriarchs can exercise, she took Michael's face between her wrinkled hands, studying it with intensity, as if reading not just his present, but also his past and future. "You have honest eyes," she finally pronounced. "Eyes that have seen too much too soon, but that still know how to marvel. I like you, Chicago man." The declaration, simple but powerful, seemed to deflate part of the tension. Even Robert appeared to slightly relax his posture as everyone sat around the cherrywood table, where generations of Taylors had shared meals, discussions, and important decisions. The meal that followed was a display of Virginia hospitality: country ham cured by Robert himself, fresh farm vegetables from the garden, blackberry cobbler that Margaret had been preparing since dawn, and bourbon from a local distillery that Robert saved for special occasions. As they ate, the conversation flowed slowly from safe topics to more compromising territories. Robert asked about Michael's business, listening with genuine attention to his explanations of current projects and business vision. Margaret inquired about his family, visibly softening when he spoke with admiration of his mother Elizabeth and the sacrifices she had made for him. It was after dessert, a homemade pecan pie that had been Emily's great-grandmother's specialty, when they finally addressed the true purpose of the visit. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, Grandmother Sarah," began Michael, his voice firm but respectful. "I haven't come just as Emily's boss or as a friend. I've come to formally introduce myself as the man who loves your daughter and granddaughter, and to ask for your blessing for our marriage." The silence that followed was so dense, it could have been cut with one of Robert's knives. Margaret let out a small gasp, her eyes moving quickly between her daughter and this man who had just made such a shocking declaration. "Marriage?" Robert's voice sounded as if it had been torn from his entrails. "How long have you been together that you're already talking about marriage?" Emily intervened, knowing this was her moment to show firmness. "5 months, Dad. But sometimes you don't need a lifetime to know you found the right person." "5 months!" exclaimed Margaret, her hand instinctively seeking the cross that hung from her neck. "You're so young, Emily, barely starting your career, and there are considerable differences between you." "If you're referring to my age, Mrs. Taylor, you're right," acknowledged Michael frankly. "I'm 15 years older than Emily, and I completely understand your concern. I also understand that our origins are different, that my past isn't spotless, that this announcement seems rushed." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "But I promise you this. I love your daughter not despite our differences, but including them. I love her connection to her roots, her faith that isn't blind but chosen, her talent that flourishes not from ambition but from genuine passion. And I swear by what's most sacred to me, which is the memory of all the sacrifices my mother made for me, that I'll dedicate every day of my life to deserving the treasure that is Emily." The raw sincerity in his voice seemed to touch something in Robert, whose expression softened imperceptibly. "And what about your plans, daughter?" he asked, addressing Emily. "You always talked about establishing your own architectural firm, about making a difference in rural heritage preservation. Where does all that fit in?" "It doesn't get left behind, Dad," she responded passionately. "On the contrary, Michael and I plan to open a joint firm where my training in traditional architecture will complement his experience in interior design. I want to integrate my Virginia origin with his urban vision to create something that honors both worlds." It was then that Grandmother Sarah, who had remained in observant silence, intervened with her worn but firm voice. "Tell me one thing, Mr. Reynolds. If you had to choose between your professional success and my granddaughter's happiness, what would you choose?" The question, direct as an arrow to the heart of the matter, created an expectant silence. Michael looked into the elderly woman's eyes, recognizing the deep wisdom behind the apparent simplicity of her question. "Her happiness? Without a second of doubt," he responded without hesitation. "I've built an empire, yes, but I discovered that the most luxurious walls are just that, walls when there's no true love inhabiting the space. Emily has taught me that real success isn't measured in completed projects or bank accounts, but in the ability to create a home where two souls can grow together." The old woman smiled, a smile that lit up her wrinkled face with an almost youthful radiance. That's the right answer, she pronounced, gently tapping the floor with her cane like a judge delivering a verdict. You have my blessing. Robert and Margaret exchanged glances, a silent conversation developing between them as can only happen between people who have shared decades of life. I won't say I'm completely convinced, Robert finally admitted, his honesty as harsh as it was comforting. But I know my daughter. She has the same stubbornness as her grandmother, and if she's chosen this man, she must have her reasons. He addressed Michael directly, his gaze intense but no longer hostile. I'll be watching you, Reynolds. Not out of distrust, but because that's how fathers protect what they love most. Prove with actions, not words, that you're worthy of her. That's all I ask, Mr. Taylor, Michael nodded. The opportunity to show you over time that your daughter hasn't made a mistake in choosing me. That night, as the Virginia sky filled with stars with a clarity impossible in the cities where they both usually lived, Emily and Michael strolled through the family vineyard. Tradition dictated that they sleep in separate rooms under the Taylor roof, a norm that both would respect without question. It went better than I expected, confessed Emily, her hand intertwined with his. I was sure my father would bring out the hunting rifle. There's still time, joked Michael, though the tension in his shoulders had considerably diminished. Your grandmother is extraordinary. Now I understand where you got that courage that captivated me from the beginning. They stopped under a century-old oak tree, its twisted trunk telling stories of overcome droughts and survived storms, a silent witness to generations of lovers who had sought its shade. This oak was planted by my great-great-grandfather as a wedding gift to his wife, explained Emily, caressing the rough bark. They say that if a couple shares a wish under its branches on a full moon night, that wish will come true. Michael looked at the sky, where the full moon shone with supernatural intensity, bathing the landscape in liquid silver. What do you wish for, Emily Taylor? He asked, drawing her into his arms. She looked into his eyes, finding in them the reflection of her own future. I wish that we build something that endures beyond us, she answered simply, not just buildings or designs, but a legacy of love that transcends stone and time. It's a beautiful wish, he murmured against her hair. And we'll make it reality, not through the magic of ancient oaks, but through the strength of our shared will. They sealed that promise with a chaste but deep kiss, conscious of the protective eyes that might be watching from the house, but more conscious still of the sacred pact they had just made under the Virginia stars, that had witnessed loves and promises since immemorial times. Spring arrived in Virginia with an explosion of colors and scents that transformed the fields into living tapestries. Dogwoods in white and pink dotted the landscape like an artist's divine brushstrokes. Magnolias laden with heavy blossoms perfumed the air, and the sky seemed bluer, more infinite, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the union that was about to take place. The small chapel of St. Roque, built in fieldstone in the 18th century and lovingly restored by generations of locals, stood on top of a hill with a view of the valley where Emily's hometown spread. Its austere but welcoming interior had been decorated with elegant simplicity. Wildflowers gathered that very morning, beeswax candles that perfumed the air with their honey scent, and white fabrics that softened the hardness of the ancestral stone. In the family home, transformed into a hive of activity since dawn, Emily prepared with the help of her mother and grandmother. Her dress, designed by herself and crafted by the skilled hands of a local seamstress, was a masterpiece of simplicity, natural silk in ivory tone that fell in clean lines to her feet, with a discreet neckline and three-quarter sleeves of Virginia lace that had belonged to her grandmother Sarah's wedding dress. Something old, smiled the old woman, adjusting the lace with surprisingly agile fingers for her age. So you remember that true love has deep roots. Margaret approached with a small blue velvet box. Something borrowed and something blue at the same time, she said, revealing a pair of sapphire earrings set in silver. They belong to my mother, who received them from hers. Someday they'll be yours forever, but today you wear them borrowed as a promise of continuity. Emily accepted them with eyes bright with emotion, moved by this unexpected gesture of acceptance from her mother, who had initially been the most reluctant about the wedding. And something new, added Lauren, her friend from New York who had traveled to be her maid of honor, giving her a fine silver bracelet with small green stones. Emeralds for good fortune and truth in love. Meanwhile, in the old manor house they had rented to accommodate Michael's family and close friends, the groom prepared with the help of his mother Elizabeth and his best friend David, a Chicago architect who had witnessed his transformation from the hungry young newcomer to the successful businessman he was today. Michael had opted for a dark grey bespoke suit, immaculate white shirt, and a tie the same green shade as the Virginia pines that surrounded the chapel. On his lapel, a small silver brooch in the shape of a grapevine, a Virginia symbol of strength and perseverance. "You look handsome, son," declared Elizabeth, adjusting his tie knot with that pride mixed with melancholy that only mothers can feel on such occasions. "Your father, wherever he is, should see you today." It was the first time she mentioned the man who had abandoned them before Michael's birth, and the comment, loaded with unexpressed emotions, created a moment of deep intimacy between mother and son. "It's okay, Mom," he responded with affection. "I have everything I need here. I have you, who were both father and mother. And soon I'll have Emily, who is my present and future." At noon, when the sun reached its zenith, bathing the landscape in golden light, the small chapel filled with a reduced but significant group of guests, the entire Taylor family, including uncles and cousins who had traveled from various corners of America, Elizabeth and the few Chicago relatives who had been able to make the trip, close friends of both, carefully selected for their significance in their lives, not for social or professional convenience. The ceremony, officiated by the town's minister, who had known Emily since her baptism, combined Protestant tradition with personal touches that reflected the fusion of their worlds. When the centuries-old wooden doors opened and Emily entered on her father's arm, Michael felt as if time stopped. She advanced down the central aisle, stepping on petals of wildflowers, her face partially veiled by an antique lace mantilla that had belonged to 5 generations of Taylor women. The light filtering through the stained glass created a multicolored halo around her figure, as if the chapel itself were blessing her. The vows, written by themselves, spoke not of submission or perfection, but of conscious commitment, of daily choice, of love built with the same patience and dedication with which buildings destined to last centuries are raised. "I, Michael, take you, Emily, not as possession but as companion," he pronounced, his voice resonating in the ancient stone walls. "I promise you not perfection but honesty, not control but shared freedom, not a path without obstacles, but a hand that will never let go of yours when stones appear." Emily's eyes shone with contained tears as she responded, "I, Emily, take you, Michael, not as savior, but as equal. I promise you not blind obedience, but conscious respect, not superficial admiration, but deep understanding, not dependence, but interdependence, where we both grow together without losing our individual essence." When the minister declared them husband and wife, and Michael gently lifted the mantilla to kiss her, a ray of sunlight pierced the main stained glass window, bathing them in a shower of colors that seemed a divine sign even to the most skeptical among those present. The celebration that followed at the vineyard, restored by Michael especially for the occasion, was a feast that fused traditions from both regions. A whole Virginia ham, carved by a local expert, artisanal cheeses from small producers across America, wines from Virginia and California competing amicably on tables, and a wedding cake that combined traditional Southern pecan with touches of Chicago-style cheesecake. As evening fell, when the golden light of sunset bathed the landscape, transforming the dogwoods into mystical silhouettes, the dancing began. First, following local tradition, the bride and groom danced a Virginia reel, patiently taught by grandmother Sarah to Michael during the previous months. Then, to the surprise of many and the emotion of Elizabeth, the musicians changed to a Chicago blues that Emily had secretly learned as a gift to her husband. It was during that dance, as her feet followed the ancestral steps of Michael's land, and her hands moved with the grace of centuries of preserved tradition, that he leaned to whisper in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me that patience is not weakness. It's the most powerful form of love." Hours later, when most guests had already retired, and only a few close family members remained conversing by the fireplace lit despite the mild spring temperature, Michael and Emily slipped away, silently. Michael had prepared a surprise that few knew about. He guided his now wife along a path illuminated with small oil lamps until they reached a building that Emily hadn't seen before, hidden among century-old oaks at some distance from the main house. "What is this?" she asked, intrigued by the stone structure whose architecture seemed a perfect fusion of traditional Virginia style with contemporary touches. "Our refuge," he responded, opening the hand-carved wooden door. "A place that is neither completely Chicagoan nor completely Virginian, but something new, something ours." The interior left Emily breathless. An open space with high ceilings, with exposed beams, stone walls that reflected the moonlight entering through strategically placed windows, floors of reclaimed hardwood, recovered from abandoned farmhouses. Simple but elegant furniture, some designed by Michael himself, others inherited from the Taylor family. And in the center, an artisanal bed built with oak wood, covered with bedding embroidered by women from the town following ancestral patterns. "I built it during these 6 months each time we came to visit your family," he explained, observing her reaction with barely disguised anxiety. "I wanted us to have a place that was just ours, a space where both worlds would meet without either dominating the other." Emily toured the room, caressing the walls, admiring the details, colonial tiles alongside contemporary ironwork, Virginia fabrics, and New Orleans pottery, each element carefully chosen to tell a story of integration and mutual respect. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "It's the home I always dreamed of without knowing I was dreaming it." When they kissed in the center of that space that was physical testimony to their union, they felt they were completing a circle that had begun with coffee spilled on a white shirt and a whispered promise in a New York penthouse. "I promise to be patient." That night, as the full moon bathed the Virginia landscape and the scent of jasmine entered through the open windows, they celebrated their union not just of bodies but of souls, of pasts and futures, of honored traditions and new paths to discover together. "It's us, materialized in stone and wood." She turned to him, her face illuminated by a mixture of love, gratitude, and desire. 3 years later, the Reynolds and Taylor firm occupied a restored brownstone in the heart of Boston's Beacon Hill. The exposed brick walls contrasted with large windows that flooded the workspaces with natural light, while the central courtyard, with its restored fountain, served as a meeting point where architects and designers shared ideas under the shade of a magnolia transplanted from the Taylor family vineyard in Virginia. Emily, now 27 and a respected name in the field of sustainable architecture, supervised a team of young professionals while distractedly caressing her 6-month pregnant belly. On her desk, plans for the restoration of a set of historic houses in Williamsburg mingled with catalogues of nursery furniture and a framed ultrasound that revealed the tiny profile of a future Reynolds Taylor. Michael entered the office with that determined step that characterized him, though his temples now showed the first silver strands that, in Emily's opinion, only made him more attractive. He had just returned from a meeting with investors interested in their most ambitious project to date, the transformation of an abandoned village in rural Virginia into a sustainable cultural and tourist center that would revitalize rural America. "We have the green light," he announced with a triumphant smile, placing a kiss on Emily's lips before kneeling to speak directly to her belly. "Did you hear that, little John? We're going to build a place where children like you will be able to discover how people lived in American villages 100 years ago, while their parents learned traditional construction techniques." Emily smiled, moved by the image of her husband speaking to their unborn son with the same seriousness with which he discussed multi-million-dollar projects. They had decided to name the baby John in honor of Emily's grandfather, thus continuing a family tradition that interwove past and future. The rural revitalization project was special for both of them. It not only represented their shared vision of preserving America's rural heritage while adapting it to contemporary needs, but also symbolized the bridge they had built between their worlds. Michael's urban and sophisticated experience perfectly complementing Emily's knowledge of rural traditions and ancestral techniques. "Have you talked to your mother?" asked Emily as she stood up with Michael's help. "She wanted to know if she needed to bring more warm clothes for her visit next month." "I talked to her this morning," he responded with an affectionate smile. "She says a Chicagoan doesn't need special clothes to face the Boston winter, that this is almost tropical compared to Chicago in the wind. But secretly she's knitting blankets and hats for the baby, as if we were going to raise him in Alaska." Both laughed, imagining Elizabeth and Sarah who against all expectations had developed a close friendship based on their shared frankness and family devotion, competing to spoil their first grandson. They went out together to the building's terrace, from where Boston's skyline could be seen shimmering like a mosaic of brick and glass under the afternoon sun. Boston had been the perfect choice to establish their joint firm and their home. A planned city, but with deep respect for tradition, modern without renouncing its historical roots, a meeting point between cultures and eras. In these 3 years of marriage, they had faced professional and personal challenges. The integration of their teams wasn't always simple. There were clients who doubted Emily's ability because of her youth, and others who questioned Michael's relevance in a world increasingly dominated by new technologies and aesthetics. They had heated discussions about creative approaches, went through a painful loss when the first pregnancy didn't reach term, and learned to balance their shared passion for work with the need to nurture their relationship. But each obstacle had strengthened their bond, polishing the rough edges as the sea polishes stones, until turning them into something more beautiful and resistant than in their original state. "What are you thinking about?" asked Michael, embracing her from behind, his hands resting protectively on the belly where their son was growing. "About us," she responded, leaning against his chest. "About how our lives intertwined from a spilled coffee and a promise of patience. About how we've built something that's greater than the sum of its parts." The sun began to descend, tinging the sky in copper and golden tones that reminded them of Virginia sunsets. "Do you know what day it is today?" he asked, his deep voice laden with contained emotion. Emily smiled, of course she knew. "The anniversary of the first time I stepped into your penthouse in New York. The day you promised to be patient." Michael gently turned her to look into her eyes, those eyes that still had the power to completely disarm him, to make him feel simultaneously vulnerable and invincible. 3 years, 7 months, and 18 days since then, he confirmed, with that precision that Emily found adorably obsessive. "And each morning, waking up beside you, I still think I'm the luckiest man in the world." "We're both lucky," she corrected, caressing his face with tenderness, "for having found each other, for having been brave, for having chosen each other every day since then." They kissed under the Boston sky, a kiss that tasted of fulfilled promises and new shared dreams. Between them, physical manifestation of their love, grew a new life that would combine the best of both worlds: the Chicago determination and the Virginia tenderness, the urban ambition and the rural wisdom, the innovative impulse and the respect for tradition. As they contemplated together the horizon where sky and city merged into an indistinguishable line, Emily thought of that distant day when she trembled before the closed door of the penthouse, caught between fear and desire. How much she had changed since then, how much they had grown together. "The true home isn't a place," she murmured, expressing the deep understanding that had blossomed within her over these years. "It's a person, a feeling, a certainty that you belong exactly where you are." Michael nodded, gently squeezing her hand. "And true love isn't possession or blind passion," he added. "It's patience. It's building together something that endures, like we build buildings destined to outlive us, to tell our story when we're no longer here." At that moment, as if nature wanted to celebrate their understanding, the baby gave a kick that both felt. They laughed, marveling at this reminder that their love had created something tangible, something that would carry their legacy toward a future they could barely imagine. "Do you remember what we wished for under your family's oak tree?" asked Michael, his hand still over the place where their son had manifested his presence. Emily nodded, the words as vivid in her memory as if she had pronounced them yesterday. "That we would build something that would endure beyond us. Not just buildings or designs, but a legacy of love that would transcend stone and time. Look around you," he said, pointing to the city stretching at their feet, and then to the belly that harbored their greatest joint creation. "We're making it reality." As the sun finally sank into the horizon, tinting the sky purple and pink, Emily understood with crystal clarity that their story wasn't about a love that magically overcomes all obstacles, but about two imperfect people who chose, day after day, to build something beautiful and lasting from their differences and similarities. As an architect, she knew that the most resistant buildings are not those constructed hastily in moments of passion, but those erected with patience, with attention to detail, with respect for the foundations and vision for the future. And so was true love, a daily construction, stone upon stone, promise upon promise, always with eternity as horizon and patience as the main tool. "I love you, Michael Reynolds," she whispered as the first stars began to shine in the increasingly dark sky. "With all that I am, with all that we will be together." "I love you, Emily Taylor," he responded, enveloping his present and future family in an embrace that promised to sustain them through all seasons to come. "And I will love you with the same patience and dedication with which we build each of our projects, to endure beyond time." As they returned inside, letting the Boston night unfold its starry mantle over the city, both felt in the deepest of their beings that they had found not just love, but purpose, to create spaces, physical and emotional, where others could feel truly at home. And that perhaps was the highest form of love, one that not only transforms those who live it, but that expands like ripples in water to touch and improve other lives. The seed planted that day in the New York penthouse had grown to become a strong and beautiful tree, with deep roots in tradition and branches extending toward a future full of possibilities. And under its shade, future generations would find refuge and learn that the most powerful love always begins with a simple promise: "I promise to be patient,